Alright, welcome to the Houston by Night session recap. I should start off by saying that, although my players are amazing at making highly edited content, I am not. I've only got a little experience with video editing and don't have access to anything super nice right now, but I'm going to do my best to make this summary enjoyable. I should also give a little bit of background information. This is not the first session for Houston by Night. We've actually had quite a few. This is the third session of our first storyline called, you guessed it, The Sword of Caine. Kind of our titular album here. We've also had a couple of one-on-one sessions, but this is the first session that's had everyone together. Let me give you a little bit of knowledge about our characters. Our first player was Negan. He allowed himself graciously to be my guinea pig when I began learning the system. Now, I'm still really learning it, by the way, but I've learned a thing or two. I'm running the V5 system, so if there's anything that I tell you that I'm doing wrong, feel free to let me know. Just know that that's all on me and not on my players. All of the characters have been turned for less than or around a month. Negan is a Brujah biker who was abandoned by his sire and adopted by the Malkavian sheriff, David Reno. They don't really get along. Negan, due to his great strength, has kind of been forced to become the sheriff's hammer. He's really been struggling with this, especially humanity-wise. He's not really a bad guy, at least not yet. Even though he's so new, he took in a thin blood by the name of Xavier. Xavier goes by Connor now, in kind of the pursuits of building a mask. Negan was out looking for shovelheads one time, found Connor in an old house. He tried to get Connor to come peacefully, but he refused, using his obfuscate abilities to turn invisible and stab Negan several times. Negan beat him into torpor as a response, staked him, and slowly, over several days, resuscitated him back from torpor. When he did, he brought him back to his own haven. That Reno owns, by the way. This big old hotel called the Moran. He is very much in danger due to this. If he gets found, he's going to be in a lot of fucking trouble. Negan suspects that Connor's clan is Malkavian due to his obfuscate abilities and not being as ugly as a Nosferatu. The second player to join us was Elijah. He was initially pretty reluctant about the idea of the vamp system, just because it kind of appeals to a little bit of an edgier fan base, and he didn't think it'd be for him. And I mean, I get it. It's not for everyone. Luckily, though, I convinced him. He does a crazy amount of writing for Elijah. He writes up documents that Elijah has written and takes notes like a madman. A very fun player to have. Elijah is inspired a little bit by the Texan cowboy aesthetic, from the way he dresses, consistently with a nice cowboy hat, to the accent he talks in, and many of his mannerisms of speech. He's also very religious, to a humorous extent, especially considering the player is very irreligious. You'll often find the typical subversion, then, is the evil religious vampire who uses that to justify doing some really terrible shit. I honestly think Elijah is a decent person, at least for now. He's of Clan Toreador and is a very potent social manipulator. He has some background in law enforcement, and he's just good at playing a part. He's also very talented with guns. He's got some ambition to him as well. His sire is a Generation 12 Toreador named Thomas Thorne. Our third player is Jack Walter. I consider having him in my chronicle as it's my greatest success, because I tried running this game before and did such a bad job I never thought I'd be able to bring him back to the table. Jack Walter is a thin blood. He practices thin blood alchemy, and he's also a chemist. Jack Walter is from Boston, and is a very interesting character. He has several thin blood banes, one of them being the Malkavian clan bane. I should note, the way we decide to run it isn't grounded in reality. We try our best to be informed on these things and not offensive, but also, we aren't trained psychologists. That said, Jack Walter's Malkavian curse would be most similar to multiple personality disorder. Certain situations that cause him to be stressed bring out different personalities that are more capable of dealing with the situation at hand. He usually also brings up a new accent or speaking mannerism when one of these new personalities arises. His sire is some 13th generation Malkavian from Boston, who goes by Don Luis. Due to various effects that have clogged up Jack Walter's memory, I'm not going to go too far into his backstory. I will tell you, though, that he arrived in Houston a couple weeks back, and he has a club called the 5 O'Clock. It's actually a grunge bar, and it was built in what was once a roller rink. With the name 5 O'Clock, you might suspect something other than a grunge bar, but in the basement of the 5 O'Clock, he also has a laboratory where he experiments on thin blood alchemy and a number of other things. We run our campaign through World Anvil, and I just thought his description was pretty funny. It reads, Bostonian club owner who's new to the area. Lots of chemicals and not a lot of patience. Our fourth and final character is named Richard McAllister. His player has been with me in tons of other games. You know, we've played D&D, we've played other tabletop RPGs, Call of Cthulhu, and I really enjoy the stories he tells. He's a really busy dude, and I appreciate that he takes time out of his schedule to play games with us, and when he does, it's always a treat. His character, Richard McAllister, is a 13th generation Nosferatu. He usually hides himself under a hat and a trench coat. He was a detective in life and continues to be a PI in his new life. He was turned by his sire, William Cobb, in order to follow a trail of missing people that would eventually connect him to Jack and the coterie, as they've been dealing with shuffleheads. Richard is incredibly socially awkward and relishes in his new abilities to turn invisible. He very much fits into the noir theme of detectives, often listening to jazz music and with a cigar. He's not very fond of the vampiric condition, but he also wasn't very fond of mortal life either. I find the way his player built him very interesting, as it's a build that doesn't rouse the blood very much at all. He took 2 level 1 obfuscate powers because he didn't want to make rouse checks. He's very good at sneaking and also very good at investigative work. Now that we've got some basic knowledge on all of our characters, we can really dive into the story. The real name for this session was Sword of Caine, Part 3, Learn to Fly. This session takes place on March 14th, 1993, in Houston. We start the session the same place we often do, in a meeting room on floor 13 of the Moran, a hotel David Reno owns. The coterie all meet in a little lounge outside this meeting room. There's an NPC named Helena who works there. She's always very friendly to the coterie. Members of the coterie meet out there before they are led into the meeting hall. When they go in, they were expecting to see David Reno in there, as he's usually in there ready to tell them whatever he wants them to hear. Today, though, his ghoul, Nick, is in there. Nick has been a ghoul for, as far as the party knows, at least 50 years. So he's pretty jaded. But he's still in contact with modern culture. First time the coterie ever met him, he was wearing a Pearl Jam shirt, which is one of his favorite bands. He spends a lot of his free time pursuing mortal criminals. Him and Elijah have a little bit of a budding friendship, as they had a dinner the other night. All the players like Nick, but Negan as a character gets annoyed by him. Nick perceives any threat to his authority as a threat to Reno's authority, which makes him very upset, and Negan, especially as a Bruja, chafes against authority. When the coterie walked in, they saw Nick with various different leads, evidence of them pinned on different boards that all led towards the Sabbat they've been trying to track down. Previously, the coterie had been tracking down a member of the Sabbat to the 5 O'Clock. When she left, Richard followed her and got the license of her getaway car. This Sabbat agent, who went by the name of Amber when Negan talked to her, was escorted to the car by a mortal. They also got his address, so those were the 2 leads they had. Additionally, Nick had been contacted by William Cobb, Richard's sire, saying that he had a job proposition for the coterie. The coterie decided to pursue this lead. In order to get information about where they should meet, Richard borrowed Jack's phone and called his sire. They talked a little bit, and Cobb told Richard to meet him at Gibbs Bar and Grill. At the end of this call, William, kind of being the paranoid bastard he is, told Richard to destroy the phone, which Richard did, crushing it under his boot. Jack was, needless to say, pretty pissed off, and he kept bothering the whole session about when he was going to get a new phone. So the coterie goes to Gibbs and meets with Mr. Cobb in the back. Mr. Cobb is fucking hideous. If you've ever scraped the first couple of layers of skin off without bleeding and it's just that red kind of muscly looking tissue, that's kind of what he looks like. That and his eyelids are also pulled open, pinned open by little bone fragments. And his lips are too small to cover the red of his mouth, so the red of his mouth is just visible. It's really an unsettling image. I don't know if I'll be able to find something that accurately represents him. Mr. Cobb is pretty friendly, though. I would be doing air quotes, but you can't see me. Gregarious might be a better word. He actively attempts to be funny, makes introductions with all the coterie members. He offers them food from Gibbs if they feel so inclined. He asks for some eggs himself. They do come out eventually and bringing food for him and Elijah, and I don't think anyone else really wanted anything other than Jack. When they brought Cobb's food, though, they brought him unnecessarily large cutlery for his breakfast eggs. He made his introductions to Elijah, saying that he had worked with his sire. When Elijah tried to get more information on this, Bill only elaborated that they had worked together relatively recently, whatever that means. He made his introductions to Jack, who told him his sire was named Don Luis. He didn't mention he was a thin blood, just that he worked with the coterie. Although he wasn't really friendly to Jack, he wasn't really unfriendly either, so. When he spoke with Richard, he only ever called him Dick. Dick, my boy. How you doing, kid? He said that Dick made him very proud, and that it was good to see him. He talked and talked about how talented his progeny was, without really revealing very much information about what he was good at. When he spoke to Negan, he was downright disrespectful. He kept making jokes about how Negan was a shovelhead and how he couldn't control his temper. Just really trying to provoke Negan. This did happen. Negan ended up rolling a compulsion. Elijah was laughing his ass off the whole time. Him and Negan don't really get along too well. Negan definitely hates Bill after that interaction. Bill brought them here in order to offer them a job, as mentioned before. Basically, he has this information network, and one of his guys, Gene, went rogue. He tells them that if they go deal with Gene, he'll lend them a haven, complete with an armory, until they've driven out the Sabbat. He also tells them that Gene is a small bit gangster and might have a couple more men with him. The coterie ultimately ends up accepting this contract, much to Nick's sadness, as he wanted to pursue one of the already existing leads on the Sabbat. Elijah also feels somewhat bad for that. So the coterie went down to this drug den where Gene was supposed to be. I thought it was funny because everyone in the party had seen places like this before and had ideas as how to solve this. There seemed to be a consensus between Elijah and Negan, though. They didn't want to have to kill any more people. Elijah at first wanted to go in and talk it out, but Negan thought he would be a better option, considering the fact that Negan kind of fits in with the gang crowd, whereas Elijah's dressed up as a cowboy and really doesn't fit in very many crowds. Negan especially was pretty determined to avoid killing people. He had already done enough of that. So he went to approach and talk to them. Richard McAllister would also be his unseen support. So Negan went up and said he wanted to talk with the boss. The gangsters who were in there grabbed Negan and brought him into a walk-in closet. You don't have a meeting with the boss? When I say closet, it was more like a pantry. Eventually the boss came, and they forced Negan to his knees. Gene is a pretty big, strong dude. He came in and started slamming down on Negan, causing him to take a lot of damage. Because he didn't resist. Negan could definitely kill him. But here's a little spoilers for you. Negan was actually about to get to a talking point with Gene before Richard ran over to grab the coterie. Richard's response was valid, his coterie was being beat to hell. He had already taken an ag and full of superficial. But in an alternate universe, Negan might have actually successfully talked his way out of things for once. Would have been a nice change of pace. So the coterie came running in. Nick, who had been traveling with them, stayed outside at first to make sure nobody was coming in or running out. It was at this point that Negan managed to communicate that he was sent by the kindred. This seemed to register with Jean, who panicked and thought if he killed his own men, maybe he could protect himself. As Elijah ran in, Negan was already managed to break his way out of being held and started feasting on one of the goons. And Jean shot one of them in the head and used his unhuman strength to smash one of their skulls in. Elijah, walking in to see this, quickly pulled out his revolver and rolled really fucking high and shot Jean in the head and instantly downed him. Or no, he shot him in the torso. You know, this scene really quickly turned pretty macabre as the coterie began to feast on what blood remained in the scene. All the dead bodies and whatever people were still alive. Jack has the baby teeth flaw, so he started taking his syringes and taking whatever he could. He got a little bit out of Jean. And he was like, oh, he has superhuman strength. Maybe his blood will be better for thin blood alchemy. There's this particular image I remember where Richard wanted to look around while he fed on one of the bodies. So it showed him reading through a newspaper he had found there, and in one hand, and on the other hand, you know, kind of glancing, he was feeding on one of the dead bodies that had already been killed, whatever blood he could still get out of it. So it turned pretty macabre pretty quick. Richard, when he was investigating, stumbled upon some papers in a desk. It was kind of like a formula, but not really. It basically just said, bourbon plus a syringe of blood equals eternal life. This is a bit confusing, but after looking around a bit more, they found a staked kindred in one of the closets of this house. The staked kindred was named Hannah. She was a shovelhead. Negan went in and unstaked her, and when that happened, she panicked. She was hungry, and she tried to eat Negan, but she managed to regain control. She was scared and confused. You know, she was turned into a vampire and didn't really remember anything, and then was kidnapped and staked here where she had been for some time, presumably providing Jean the blood he needed to become a ghoul. Negan did his best to comfort her and keep her calm. As Negan was kind of answering some questions and trying to keep her calm, there was a huge debate happening in the room out there. Elijah and Negan and Nick had been together for a little bit of time now. They knew the drill. They knew it was their job to kill the shovelhead. They had to keep the Sabbat incursions into Camarilla territory secret for now. Camarilla, Camarilla, whichever you prefer. They needed to keep it secret because they needed to know more, know how bad it was before they presented it to the public so that they wouldn't panic. It was their job. None of them wanted to kill her. And Richard and Jack were really struggling with this idea because they'd just been brought in, and so far they'd seen themselves doing good, you know. Kill the bad guys, yeah, but this is an innocent life that they have to take. I mean, as innocent as a vampire could be. Nick, being Reno's ghoul, though, he didn't want to kill her either, but he knows better than to disobey orders. So, as Elijah explained why they had to do this to both Richard and Jack, Negan left the room and he was upset. He was pissed. He's calling it all bullshit. And they eventually knew what had to be done, but they were all sad and Negan was pissed. All the coterie went to the van. Elijah rolled pretty well on his awareness, so as he was walking away, he could hear Nick shakily reciting the Rite of Destruction. As they all left the building, they were haunted by one last high-pitched scream. All of the party that fed on still living blood gained the choleric resonance. We haven't really played much with the resonances or Disgracias too much yet. Elijah technically got the last bit of blood out of Gene, so he had the Disgracia cycle of violence for a little bit there. But that wasn't really amenable to his build. He was kind of upset about it, in all honesty. After this, the coterie returned to the Moran, all to go their separate ways. Jack Walter didn't have a car, so Elijah gave him a ride home. It was at this point that Elijah gave Jack the Elijah document. I referenced it earlier. It's like a 20-page document full of notes of what Elijah has discovered on Vampiric Society. And it's pretty big. Elijah probably could have asked for a boon in retrospect. You know, it's worth quite a bit, but he didn't. He felt pretty bad after tonight's events. Jack Walter was an unsanctioned embrace, a thin blood. In danger himself, he probably rationalized. Jack Walter must have been thinking, oh god, what's stopping them from doing this to me? They're serious about this whole kill people who aren't allowed. So I think Elijah did this mostly to give Jack a little bit of hope. Alright, this part is just for the viewers. Players, you gotta skip to the end to the voting part, but this is just for the viewers, so don't watch this. When Negan got home, he talked with his little thin blood friend again, his friend Connor. And while Negan had been gone that day, Connor had gotten more hungry. Connor was at hunger 3 now. Negan promised him to take him out to eat sometime. Negan had already had enough difficulty managing his own hunger. But now he's got to manage a thin blood too. He's got to eat for 2. Also, another important note. Jack Walter did not get rid of the Elijah document. It still exists in world. It is within his vault at his bar, the 5 o'clock, in the basement. So, that might come up in the future again. We'll see. A little tradition we have in our Vamp game. It's not really a tradition because we haven't been doing it for long yet, but it will be. It's something cool we do, is we vote at the end of each session. Each player gets to vote for one player other than themselves, and kind of nominate them, maybe for a little bit of extra XP, for something cool they did during session. Elijah nominated Negan's player after this session because he felt Negan had the full range, the compulsions. He did a good job during combat, interesting stuff during combat. He said it was excellent roleplay because during the scene where Negan stood up to Mr. Cobb, where he had his compulsion, he was being such a prick, and he definitely could have been suboptimal, but he chose not to. And also that scene, some people think of Negan as just the hammer, but Negan is a man with a heart. And when Negan went in there to those gangsters and let them beat the shit out of him and refused to start violence, that really speaks volumes about Negan's character. That he doesn't want to perpetuate this cycle of violence. Richard also nominated Negan. When we played this session, it was a while back, so forgive me for not having all the details. Richard's player really liked Negan's speech about the unfairness of life for the recently turned kindred, how they were killing shovelheads, and how Negan got to live, but these people didn't. It didn't make sense. And Richard thought that Negan's speech on this was really good. Negan's player voted for Richard's player. He really enjoyed the investigation happening with the kind of the scene in the background of this whole massacre, and just how macabre it was, and how Richard kind of was just like, ignoring that to an extent and just continuing the investigation and all the sneakiness. And he also liked earlier that conflict that arose when Richard crushed Jack's phone. And finally, Jack Walter voted for Elijah's player on the basis of he realized just how involved Elijah was in the world. Every it seemed Elijah had a lot of knowledge about the world, and really enjoyed seeing him act as a human who had recently learned all of this knowledge on the vampiric world and how he chose to express that knowledge. And the document, my God, the document. It's just incredibly well written. Maybe I'll link it below. We'll see. All right, so yeah, that was session one of the recap, session three of the actual sessions. But these are gonna start coming out more often. Um, I've got all the technology I need, and this one happened a while back, so my memory is a little bit more hazy. Um, and I'm going to start uploading. There's probably going to be still a 3-day interval at least. The next video that comes out will probably be a player perspective on session 4. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. Please leave a comment, and if you liked, like, but if you disliked, please dislike. But give me ideas on how I can improve going forward. And of course, go do the same for the player POVs because they put their hearts and souls into those POVs, and I love them.